Hi, my name is Jiaqi. I am from the University of Leeds, and today I'm going to give a talk on simulating urban transition in major socioeconomic shocks. And this is work in collaboration with Dr. Furtado from IPEA in Brazil. So the background of the talk is the increasing concerns for the environment and climate change, especially after the COP26 meeting. Many countries have committed to significantly reduce their carbon emissions, and that has to be done by an escalated transition away from traditional fossil fuel-based economy to a greener and more knowledge-based one. Countries like Norway that heavily rely on the oil and gas sectors are committed to phasing out the oil industry and diversifying its economy. Similarly, cities with a large proportion of employment in traditional sectors also need to adapt so that they can maintain their economic competitiveness and livelihood. Historically, however, the transition from the old to the new economy is not always smooth. Previous waves of industrial revolution and globalization have created winners and losers. An example is the South and North divide in the UK, where the South, especially the London area, can benefit greatly from the technological revolution and globalization, whereas the North, that used to have a lot of employment in coal mining and manufacturing, have lost jobs in these areas and have suffered decades-long economic stagnation. And this can be said for many countries across the world, in both developed countries and emerging economies. Historically, the decline of a city or region is often closely associated with the decline of the city's main industries. So while successful transition can take many forms, unsuccessful ones have almost always led to devastating social consequences, such as economic stagnation, long-term unemployment, mental health issues, and social divide and polarization. A lot of these we have witnessed in the last few years. So in this talk, I'm going to propose a stylized ABM of urban transition to help us understand the process. So we will simulate the transition path of the city from the old economy towards the new one. And we will represent explicitly two very important markets, the labor market and the housing market. And we will couple the labor and housing markets by introducing feedback loops between them. So, for example, if the changes in the labor market may have a huge impact on the local neighborhoods, if a lot of people lose their jobs in the neighborhoods, it will change the characteristics of those neighborhoods. And on the other hand, changing in those neighborhoods will also affect local businesses and services in turn. And we also want to look at a medium-term dynamics. We will have a time scale of roughly 10 years because although there have been lots of research looking at short-term dynamics, for example, people movement in the city in a day, or a very long-term equilibrium, like many conventional economic studies will look at, there are fewer studies that looks at the medium-term dynamics, especially where the transition takes place. And modeling medium term is very hard because the dynamics can be very complex, but it could also be very important and relevant for policy. So the model setup, there are three industries: the new, the old, and the service. New and old industries require a higher skill and offers higher income. But more importantly, they are connected to the global economy, and their growth rate is not is exogenous to the model and not determined by the local neighborhood GDP, although it can be constrained by local human capital. There are fewer but larger businesses in each of these industries that are located in specific areas in the city. On the other hand, the service industry requires a lower skill and also offers lower income level, and its growth rate is endogenous to the model and depends on the local neighborhood GDP. There are a larger number of smaller service businesses that are located all over the city, but more densely in the city center. So this is what a stylized urban landscape look like, and this is where also the distribution of businesses in the old, new, and service industries look like. So we have a city center where there is a denser distribution of service industry. So there are more service businesses in the city center. And then we have 3 rings going outwards from the city center. So, and each ring consists of 6 different neighborhoods. So the further away you are from the city center, the larger these neighborhoods are in size. And we put all the businesses in the old industry in the northeast corner of the city, and all the businesses in the new industry in the southwest corner, so that we can separate the effect of the scenarios. And I'll quickly talk about the matching process in the labor market. So is there is a two-way selection between businesses and job candidates. So businesses will first post their job advert on the labor market with a minimum skill requirement and income, and then they will rank all the applicants by their skill level and pick the one with the highest skill level, that who is willing to accept the job offer. And on the other hand, job candidates will search for jobs that her skill is eligible for which the skill is eligible, and then she will rank all eligible jobs by income and apply for those with the highest income. So the selection is two-way. A skill plays a very important role in the labor market. A person can increase her skill by getting training, and the opportunity of training is a key parameter in the model. So if a person is unemployed, her skill will depreciate, which is backed by a lot of empirical evidence. So the longer a person stays unemployed, the less likely that she will find a job, because she now have less skilled and become less competitive, which is again backed up by a lot of empirical studies. And we also explicit model the matching process in the housing market. So again, there is 2 sides of the story: the house sellers and buyers. And house sellers will publish their asking price on the housing market, which is public information. And then the longer the house seller is on the market, unable to sell the house, the deeper the discount a house seller will give on the asking price. On the other hand, a house buyer will search all the houses it can afford. So there's an affordability criteria, and rank all the houses that he or she has searched for in the order of the neighborhood quality, which will depend on their heterogeneous preferences. So there are 5 elements that they evaluate in the neighborhood quality: and the price of the house, the distance to work, the neighborhood's mean income as a proxy for neighborhood quality, percentage of skilled workers in the neighborhood as a proxy for the class feature of the neighborhood, and lastly, the service level. And once the person has searched for all affordable houses, she will put in a bid for the best house within the budget. And if there's a match between a bid and an ask, there will be a transaction in the housing market. Just a few more words on how price is adjusted in the housing market. So first there will be a reference price based on past transaction prices in the same neighborhoods. And then sellers and buyers will adjust their asking and bid price by their time on market. So the longer a seller has been on the market, the more discount on reference price the sellers offer. And the longer a buyer has been on the market, unable to buy a house, the more premium on reference price the buyer offers. So this is to reflect, for the price to reflect the market conditions. So if there's more seller than a buyer, price will go down. And if there's more buyer than sellers, price will go up. And there are 4 scenarios we want to look at. The baseline scenario will feature no growth in the old and new industries and a relatively small training opportunity. And then we introduce the transition scenario, where the old industry will decline at 10% per year, and the new industry will grow at 10% per year. So over time, the new industry will surpass the old and replace and surpass the old. And then we introduce this 3rd scenario of transition with enhanced training. So the growth rate is the same as in the transition, but there will be more opportunity for the population to get training. And finally, we'll have the collapse scenario, where the old industry declined sharply and in a very short time, and the new industry will grow only very slowly. And this is an open model where people can come in and leave the model. Each step equals a week, and we'll simulate 100 period initial steps for the burnout, which is followed by 500 steps, which is roughly 10 years time in real time. And these are the results. So this is the left, upper left is unemployment, upper right housing price index, lower left household income, lower right the Gini index. So the results are as expected. So in all cases, the collapse features the highest unemployment rate, the biggest drop in housing prices, the biggest drops in household income, and the highest Gini index. And in the transition, both transition and training scenarios features lower unemployment rate, higher housing price, higher household income, and lower Gini index. And training also does slightly better than transition without enhanced training. And what's very interesting is the ripple effect in the industry. So on the upper left is the average skill in the whole city, which not surprisingly, with training, you will have a higher average skill or higher local human capital with enhanced training. And in the case of collapse, the local human capital really declines. But what's really interesting is the upper right, that is a skill level in the service industry, where there is a much higher average skill level in the collapse. And that's where a lot of people who used to work in the skilled industries with high skills now have to work in the service industry because they've lost their job in the old industry. And the lower left is the number of applicants for the service jobs. And the lower right is the number of job adverts for the service industry. So although we have not imposed any external shocks to the service industry. The service industry does reflect the economy in the whole city. So with under collapse, there have been a lot more applications for jobs in the service industries from people who lost their jobs in the other two in the old industry, and on the transition and training, because the economy has really been growing, there have been more demand for workers in the service industry. So these are all as expected. I'm running out of time, so I won't go into details, but these are the different patterns in different neighborhoods. As you can see, although they share similar patterns because they're all in the same city, the slope look very different. So some neighborhoods will decline more than others, and the impact on these neighborhoods will be different in different scenarios. The same for household income in these neighborhoods. Again, although they share the same pattern, the growth rate, the slope looks very different. And the same for unemployment rate across the neighborhoods. So very quickly, I want to reflect on these preliminary results. So first of all, the results look very different for the scenarios. And the collapse of the old industry without growth in the new industry will result in high unemployment rate, high inequality, and the depression of local human capital. On the other hand, growth in the new industry, especially if it's accompanied by training, can fully offset the phasing out of the old industry. And we've also noticed the ripple effect on the service industry. And finally, the impact is heterogeneous on different neighborhoods in the city. And finally, these are the work we have planned for the future. We want to conduct a full sensitivity analysis. We want to calibrate model parameters on real-world data or pattern. Since it's a highly abstract model, we will probably calibrate it on real-world pattern rather than data. But later on, we do plan to conduct a case study with real-world data. And we want to explore different issues with the model. For example, the brain drain index, so the speed at which unemployed skilled workers leave the city. We want to look at different protectionism policies where you give priorities to local workers. We want to look at remote working scenarios where people who join the workforce doesn't need to be relocated to the city. And we want to also look at targeted training, where you can target training at workers who are already at the margin of being qualified for skilled jobs. And finally, we want to look at different level of skill transferabilities between industries. And that's it. Thank you very much.